Today's video is brought to you by ablmerch.com. We've got hats, t-shirts, stickers, mugs, and more, including these snazzy USA Special Edition hats, all available through the link in the description box below. How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about the Runaway Texas State House Democrat who was grilled by Pete Hegseth over on the Fox News channel. Now, I do have video of that, but before I get into it, I got to back up a little bit here to explain to you what's going on, just so you have proper context and so we're on the same page with each other. Now, you may have seen this picture on the screen before you floating around the internet, and you may be wondering, hey, ABL, what's happening in that picture? And how does it tie into today's subject? What's going on? Well, I'll explain. This is a plane full of Texas State House Democrats who fled the state because they oppose Republicans and their support of new voting laws. And the laws are pretty simple. Things like banning 24-hour voting. You'll still be able to vote until like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, just not 24 hours like an IHOP. Also, they are going to require you to present ID if you want to have a mail-in ballot. There will be no more drive-through voting, which was brought about during the scandemic pandemic. And there will also be expansions to voting access in some parts of the state. So the proposed laws aren't really bad, but the Democrats don't want it to happen. Now, the question is, why did they flee? Why are they on the planes? According to rules in Texas, you must have 2/3 of the state house present to have any votes go forward. Also, in Texas rules, if you don't show up to vote, you may be arrested and compelled to at least show up. Now, the catch is that the arrest thing only applies to Texas. So, for example, if you live in Austin, the capital, and you flee to Dallas, they can go to Dallas and bring you back to Austin and make you show up. Right. But if you go to D.C., which is where the Democrats went on these two chartered jets, then they can't go to D.C. They can stay out there for as long as the session is, which is 30 days. So they're going to come back in August. And the whole thing is to prolong the inevitable. They don't have the numbers. They don't have any chance of stopping it, but they're going to keep trying over and over as long as it takes to prevent it from going down. But at a certain point, they got to come back to the state. You can't just be an elected official and refuse to go back to your state. It doesn't make any sense. But before I go any further, let's roll the clip. In this clip, you're going to see the interaction between Pete Hegseth and the Texas State House Democrat who left and is in D.C. right now. After we get done with that, I'll talk about what they said there. Then I'll give you the rest of my 2 cents, my deep, detailed analysis, and then I'll wrap it on up with a nice bow on top. So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll it.
Are you okay with voter ID?
So voter ID is currently required in the state of Texas. I opposed having to
How about
have
for
a driver's
mail-in
license
ballots?
to vote.
How about having to send your ballot in? Should you have to prove who you are? Because that's
Pete,
what Democrats are opposing.
Pete, I just said I oppose voter ID. Currently, it's a law in Texas, but I oppose that law because I think you don't need
an ID. Voter ID? You don't think the most sacred obligation of our republic, you should have to prove who you are in order to vote?
So there are a lot of Texans, actually hundreds of thousands, who don't have a driver's license, who don't drive
who
at all.
Can't? Do they have a social security number? Because according to this Republican law, you can put your last 4 digits of your social security number in as proof of who you are. Did they not? No, help me out. Do those people not have social security numbers? And who are these people that can't get IDs?
So, Pete, if you're talking about the bill that we're currently focused on, not past Texas law, what this bill is going to do is not only reduce voting hours, it's also going to empower these partisan poll watchers who are going to look over voters' shoulders and prevent them from exercising their God-given right.
Partisan poll watchers, you mean the ones that weren't allowed in certain states at certain times in certain places, whether you agree with that or not? So Texas says maybe we should have partisan poll watchers on either side, Republicans and Democrats, right? It wouldn't just be Republicans.
Do you remember a second ago when I talked about the big lie? This is exactly what I'm talking about. And the reason that so many folks believe in this country is because folks like you get on television, James, every night and said
you don't want voter ID. We're not talking about that. You just went on national television and said you don't want voter ID, revealing exactly what Democrats. And it's so condescending to say that people can't get identification. Have you found someone in your district that can't get identification?
You have made a lot of money personally, and you've enriched a lot of corporations with advertising by getting on here and spewing lies and conspiracy theories to folks who trust you.
And
so what I'm asking you to do is to tell your voters right now that Donald Trump lost the election in 2020.
At least you've resolved the lie that is Democrats are now for voter ID. It's not your show, sir, but at least you resolved the idea that Democrats are not for voter ID.
Did Donald Trump lose the election in 2020?
Real quick.
Can you answer the question? Did Donald Trump lose the election in 2020?
I'm answering questions. Don't
is
really
this
feel any obligation to answer anything
an uncomfortable
of you.
question for you?
No, it's
See, this is the reason
my question is why are you in Washington,
lie...
D.C. and not in Texas when your job is in Texas? Because you know it's inevitable that this bill is going to pass. Eventually, you're going to have to pay your hotel bill and go back to Texas, and Governor Abbott will declare a special session. So you're being used by national Democrats to try to pass H.R. 1 to federalize elections, which you as a Harvard grad should know better because the Constitution puts that in the hands of state legislators who are supposed to be in their state, and you happen to be in Washington, D.C.
All right, so you saw that, you heard that. Now, this is really silly, and I feel like what Pete Hegseth said and what others are saying, that these Democrats are being used by the Democratic machine in the federal government. First of all, they're going to D.C., and they're on 2 chartered flights. Who's paying for the flights? You think they make a lot of money as Texas State House Democrats to be able to just pull the money together and get 2 chartered flights? Come on. It makes no sense. They could have easily just flown Southwest or something like that, but nah, they want to do that. They want to fly in style on a chartered flight. And they're in D.C., where they're going to be living. They got to live somewhere. You got to be able to sleep somewhere and get something to eat and use a restroom, all this and that. They're not going to be homeless, so where they're going to be living in this amount of time? This is big Democrat money, D.C. money, funding all this. And they want to oppose what they're doing in Texas to support what's going to be happening in D.C. They want to federalize the election. And what I mean by that is you're going to have less autonomy in certain states. I think Georgia passed certain laws. Arizona passed certain laws. There are certain laws passed in some states that the federal government wants to eliminate by having the federal law take precedent. And I think one of the bills is called For the People Act, and I'll link to more about that in the box. But in the act, I was reading an article about it, and it said that voter ID is burdensome to minorities. Really burdensome? It's crazy. And you heard what the guy was saying right there in the clip, talking about he's against voter ID, talking about even to have the last 4 of your social is too much. Why is that a problem? Why is presenting the ID an issue? And people talk about, oh, it's too expensive and it's a poll tax. No, it's not. In Texas, you can get an ID for free, for 100% free. And you're talking about minorities. I don't like how they want to use this whole black thing, this minority thing as an excuse to just have control over elections and to have elections go the way they want it to go. That's just my humble opinion. Now, as far as the cheating and whatnot, I'll talk about that in a minute. But this whole minority thing doesn't make any sense because you got to have ID to do a lot of different things. When I was 16 years old, trying to get a job working $6.25 an hour, I had to do a urine test, present my ID, and a bunch of more stuff. So it's like, why is having the ID burdensome to vote, but to do a whole P test and present my ID to get a job making minimum wage at the time, that's not really burdensome. That's not really a big deal. I mean, I don't understand how that makes any sense. It does not make any sense. You can get a free ID in Texas. It's not a problem to have identification. And then as far as black folks are concerned, 25%, 1 out of every 4 black Americans are on some kind of government assistance program at any point in time. Now, I'm not saying it's the same 25% all the time. It's rotating. Some are going to be on there for a short period of time. Some are going to be for a long period of time. Either way it goes, 1 out of every 4. Now, in order to get welfare benefits, EBT, WIC, TANF Section 8, etc., you got to have identification. Okay, matter of fact, you got to have a lot more than that. If you want a program like Section 8, public housing or whatever, you got to have identification, proof of income, birth certificates for yourself and your children, all that stuff. So if these things aren't burdensome and racist, then why is it all of a sudden that way when it comes to voting? You can get a free ID card in the state of Texas. What is the problem? I don't see it. I think the Democrats just want to have the elections become federalized, and whatever they say is going to go, because they want to have that window open to do whatever they want. Now, like I said in previous videos, I would never say that Trump was cheated out of the election. I would never say that, because that's not right. The government told me it didn't happen. Mainstream media told me it didn't happen. So whatever I see on television from these trusted news sources is always right. It doesn't matter when they issue retractions on the low and they don't want anybody to know they did. It doesn't really matter. Whatever they say, I'm going to believe, because that's what I've been told as a good American, right? Anyway, they want that window open to do whatever they want. Think about it like this. If you have universal mail-in ballots, right, which is what happened last time, and they just mail out ballots to anybody that's on the rolls, people have moved, different addresses, they may have died. I saw a video of a guy in D.C. that had 8 different people's ballots come to his apartment. 8 different people. So if there's no voter ID and universal mail-in ballots happen, what's to prevent that man from taking all those ballots, filling them out, and just sending them? I mean, how are you going to know that it didn't happen? How can you really know that? People are going to say, well, there's no real evidence of voter fraud. It's rare. Okay, that's fine. Well, if there's no evidence of it, then having some of these rules in the book shouldn't be a big deal. It's a non-issue, right? So if it's a non-issue, then why is Joe Biden going around talking about it? Why are people spending so much money trying to oppose it? Why are these Democrats leaving their post in Texas and going all the way to D.C.? Where's the money coming from for that? What's the big deal? If it's such a non-issue, then why is it a big issue to some people? What's really going on? I think we know the answer to that whole situation. But as I close, I want to say this. Voting laws aren't racist. Having an ID is not racist. Everyone has an ID. If you don't have an ID, you probably don't want one. It's just that simple. It kind of reminds me of Kamala Harris talking about, all the poor folks in the country in the rural areas that can't get to a Kinko's, out of touch. Like, some people are out of touch. They don't know what's going on. Kamala, she pretty much does whatever she's told. If they tell her to go out there and do a backflip, back tuck in the grass and land on your feet, she'll do it. She's pretty much a puppet. Same thing with Joe. Joe not even really there. He pretty much got 2 feet in the ground right now. He's halfway gone. So he doesn't know what's going on. The people that are behind the scenes, that the staffers and the big money people, they are running the show right now. And what they want to do is what is unfolding in front of our very eyes. Not any kind of real leadership, but big money, big politicos, big lobbyists in DC. They have their own narrative to push, and that's what's happening. This whole nonsense about racism and all this and that and the third is bogus. And also, one last thing before I close, I'm never going to answer a question talking about, say right now that Trump lost. I'm never going to say anything like that, because it's just like when somebody says jump and you say how high. It's the exact same thing. They're trying to control you. I'm not going to be controlled. I'll say whatever I want to say, and that's just how it goes. But I think I'll leave that right there for now. And what said you? How do you feel about Pete Hegseth versus this Texas State House Democrat? Did the guy pretty much echo whatever the national Democrats told him to say? Whatever your thoughts on that are, let me know in the comments below. You guys pretty much know where I'm at. Having a fair and safe election is not racist. Now, the only thing is some people have a different opinion about what fair and safe is. Some people say no ID, vote whenever you want, mail in, no ID, and that's fair and safe. Some say that's not. And it doesn't matter if you think somebody was cheated or not cheated, like Stacey Abrams or whoever. That doesn't really matter. What matters is what makes common sense. And what makes common sense is if I want to vote and I want to have voting mean something, I want it to be secure. I want it to be safe. I want to feel safe. I want things to be safe. And I don't feel safe when I see videos on the internet of guys getting 8, 9, 10 ballots mailed to their house because you got universal mail-in ballot and you got things just floating everywhere. Ballots hanging out of people's mailboxes that you didn't even ask for. That's not safe. That's not secure. What they're doing in Texas makes sense. And I think we should all oppose the federales trying to come in and take control away from the states. We want to go in a true positive direction rather than regressing in our nation. But whatever your thoughts are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.